You get an email once they're graded.
There you go. Thank you, Nicole. Um, I want to share with you my screen here. I'm going to look at the Canvas where we are this week. Today we are doing Module 6. Your reading assignment is right there. The 3 texts that I had you read, they're chapters in Eddie Glaude's book, Democracy in Black. I noticed that there was I suspect there might have been a problem with the article I posted for you all from The Economist. Maybe it was just for me, but they wanted a subscription because I've read many of their articles before. But maybe if you are not someone who frequents The Economist, they'll let you read that article. In any case, I took the liberty of photocopying it and posting it again right here. I think it's a very important addendum to Eddie Glaude's book because it gets into the details of some policy recommendations to address just the kind of concerns he has. And it is very updated. Of course, it was written in June of this year. Next week, we're going to be looking at The New Jim Crow, chapters 5 and 6 by Michelle Alexander. That's where your reading responses will be due. Okay, and our next paper is not due until the 10th, sorry, November 4th. So I have some time before I need to post anything there. Okay. So does anybody have any questions about any of that business of class? Anybody have any questions about the papers, the readings, the blah? No?
When is our next big assignment? That is not like
November 4th.
November 4th.
That's when your next papers will be due.
I have like in a month.
I guess so, right? I have not yet posted those or even come up with those essay topics. So that will be coming presently. Any other questions? All right. Good. So, sorry, was someone saying something? I don't know. I don't know how technology works. All right. So I am going to do something a little bit dangerous for me. I'm going to do the breakout room thing. I'm going to start by opening with a dangerous question. Oh, by the way, hey, everybody. The president got COVID. I don't know if you heard. He's all better, though. He's good. It wasn't so bad.
Herman Cain got better and then he died, so.
Okay, I won't end that sentence, Gabriel. I'll leave to everybody's imagination. Tonight is the vice presidential debate. So if you do not have a hot date, then I suggest you tune in. And no one should be dating during COVID. So just watch the dang debate, okay? It promises to be actually substantial. You could probably even listen to it and get something out of it. So I want to do something a little different here. I want to try and get everybody involved. I've been very pleased with the discussions in class and you all taking part, but I want to make sure that we get even more of you involved. So I'm going to do I'm going to try the breakout rooms, and I'm going to do it by, I'm going to give you all, I think is a provocative question. I really couldn't think of any other way to make it less provocative. So fuck it, it's provocative, you know. It's a tough question. I mean, I had you read the Eddie Glaude book because, well, I think it's a very good book. I read it over the summer. And I thought that it really raised some very good and timely issues pertaining to, racial equality, racial inequality, the struggle for racial equality, that we have really, that have really come to the forefront in America over this past summer. It's, for better or for worse, that's the point. Trump has really made this a very pressing topic. And I still remember back when he was elected 5 years ago, I wrote an article about this at the time that, so many people, mostly liberals, in fact, were shocked and appalled that the kind of racism that Trump flirted with would even be uttered, much less elected. Remember how everybody just ignored his candidacy out of hand, and it proved that the racism that he gave voice to was much more resilient than some or many people believed or refused to deny all these years. By the way, and lest this discussion seem a little bit America centric, I did mention this previously, that the Black Lives Matter movement has really been spreading its borders. It's spreading beyond the American borders, I should say. There have been protests in favor of Black Lives Matter in London, Paris, in countries all over the globe, and there are many countries that are dealing with the work of racial progress in their own ways. Brazil comes to mind. This is a very pertinent discussion for them. So even while some of the context of our discussion may seem to be America-centered, it absolutely pertains more broadly. And this president, like it or not, is one of the most consequential figures on the global stage. And what he does and what he says and what he stands for, has an impact that far exceeds this country. I remember after he was elected in 2016, I was invited to be part of a panel discussion about, what do we expect a Trump presidency would be like? And it was mostly liberals who were invited us to the panel. They were very anxious. And I don't even remember what I said to them, but I remember I was on the panel with this economist. He's actually a pretty big guy. He writes for Bloomberg, Tyler Cowen. And he said at the time, and I think he was right. He said, an American president is always more consequential for foreign relations, right? That's where the American presidents leave their mark. And that's what we should be most concerned about. I mean, I guess I don't know if he's totally right, but the reason I'm, because I think that we may look back on this era and realize the ways in which Trump has, impacted and formed this country internally in very important and searing ways. But I make this point to just, make clear that the American president, whoever it is, has an impact that far exceeds the boundaries of this country in many different ways. So what that means to say is that this president's racial politics is going to spread beyond the scope of this country, okay? Now, Eddie Glaude wrote this book in, I believe, 2016, 2017. And the topics he's talking about have only taken on greater urgency, you could say, right now, this past summer, right? Things really seem to be coming to some kind of a head. Who knows where it's going to go? But in that light, this is the topic I want you all to discuss in your groups. I'm going to break everybody up in just a second. I just put it in the chat. Oh, wait, did I? There we go. So, will Trump's presidency, looking ahead, prove to be a step in the right direction of racial progress, obviously indirectly, or not? And I want you all to give your reasoning for that, okay? And so I'm going to put you all into breakout rooms. Looks like I'll make 4 breakout rooms and just see how this goes. Okay? What did I do? Did it work?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
How's it going, guys? I'm just dropping in.
Going good.
Cool. I'll leave you to your business. Bye.
Bye.
Who are just like very, I mean, on both sides, there's clearly like people who are very like polarized into their own opinion. So just like there's going like I kind of agree like more on what
of him is to be racist at this point, though. So I feel like you can't, you can call it not racist, but it's still racist.
The step in the right direction is kind of already happening. Hopefully we'll find out in November.
Hey.
All right. Are we back? Looks like we're back. Well, I'm very proud of myself that I pulled that shit off. I forgot to tell you guys, you may have noticed I'm dressed in, these are athletic clothes. I don't usually wear athletic clothes. You're not going to believe this, but I'm a coach of my daughter's soccer team, a very bad coach. And I have to, so I'm going to have to cut out right around 5:30 today because I got to go coach her team. But let's see here. So provocative question, hopefully, maybe not too dangerous. Will Trump's presidency prove to be a step in the right direction of racial progress? Dream with me 10 years down the road. What do you think we're going to see? Who wants to tell us what you all came up with? What kind of stuff did you guys talk about?
My group was basically saying while he himself has not made any actions for like positive race relations, like his actions have shined a light on like the fact that it's not like going anywhere. Like there are still racist people, there's still racist people in power who implement certain institutional racist practices, and so that kind of gives it like, because you can expose that weak point, you know what I'm saying? You can like identify it and then figure out how to solve that issue, as opposed to like someone who's like a closeted racist, or like people who like deny it, or, you know what I'm saying? Like if it doesn't happen, then you can't say it's real or identify it, you know? So there's like, you basically said like, yes, but like there's a lot of buts to go with that, yeah, with yes, basically.
Thank you, Rashad. That was super. Somebody else. What else do you guys have to say about this topic?
We talked a lot about accelerationism, sort of benefits, pros and cons, the moral sort of idea around it, which for those who don't know, accelerationism essentially posits that like the change, like if you want radical change, the only way you can achieve it is having radical opposite change to whiplash to the other side. That progressive change doesn't really work effectively. And I don't know who coined the term, but I know Marx talked about it a lot, which he sort of advocated for hyper capitalism to go extreme before you can swap over, essentially saying that it's impossible to slowly progress towards socialism. That won't happen. So yeah, but there's a lot of moral issues with that, right? Like I'm casting a ballot for Trump so that we can get another term, so that we can get a more democratic, like the logic is, you know, it will end up hurting a lot of people in the process.
Good. So the point being that the goals of accelerationism, there may be a lot of casualties along the way. Yeah.
Right.
Good. Thank you. Somebody else? No? Anybody? Hello? Anybody else want to tell me what you talked about in your group on this topic?
Our group kind of kept circling back around to the, like, this question is really hard to answer. Like, where we are currently in time, it's one of the things where it's like, come back to me after November and we'll see what happens. But there's a lot that can go wrong. And also like a lot that can go right, but we really are at like a tipping point.
Thank you, Mason. That's a great point. And one other group I haven't heard from. Who are you? Where are you? No? Jacob, Gabriel, what you just post there?
Okay, so another thing we were talking about was like further subdivision, that like if Trump loses, yeah, like a lot of places will get a lot better, but like places that are already like super white and conservative will get even so much worse, right? Because it's just gonna make them angrier. So this came out like last year, but I remembered it. So this is a Vice News clip, and the title of it is "Start a New Life Free of Liberals with Conservative Move," which is sort of these communities, that are like, they're targeted just for Republicans. Like, do you live in a liberal hellhole, but you know, and you can have the means to move? Well, come out here. Like, you know, it's all people who are like-minded. Which is like, it's really scary, the idea of housing just being based on political beliefs and how toxic that is.
Well, moving to states that are moving to red states, I think that's part of this. I've heard about this. There are realtors that cater to conservatives.
This is even one. It's more. It's not just the red state, but it's like a community of people who are really passionate. Like, you know, the conservative.
Why is that worrisome?
It's gonna polarize people even more. Like,
I don't think people do that already.
Don't people do that already? Rashad.
Tribalism. People do it all the time.
Would this be a step up from the tribalism we already have, Gabriel? That's the point Rashad is making.
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, if you're going from, like, it becomes so even easier to dehumanize if you don't have to interact with them. Like, you may hate, let's say you may be Republican, you may hate liberals, and like you may hate overhearing at the grocery store, you know, some topic about race or welfare, just like walking past them, like you seethe, like you hate them, whatever, right? But at least you're like, they're still people. You're still like walking past them, right? You're still like being around that. But when you go, and then now you're completely isolated, like some people in these communities, I probably will not see like a Black person at all, right? Anywhere they go, as long as they stay in this community. It becomes even easier to make people, to see people as, you know, anything other than a person.
There are plenty of places already like that in the United States. Even when that happens, like people will like fight. Even when that happens, like with people, if they stay amongst themselves for like, say, like theoretically like decades to come, they'll find differences within themselves. They'll like find differences within themselves to not like each other about. So it's gonna happen regardless. It already happens. It happens to
I feel
don't
like
think it works.
I feel like it's more of a problem of translation, which is like taking people from these like liberal communities and like we just we're and then moving them into conservatives where they like it's the fact that these are being targeted as a way of like moving out, right? It's bad for their kids who may have had a different ability, to have things like it's more of just like the further like physically moving people and having it trying to incentivize that.
Cameron, then Laurel.
I mean, this is already happening everywhere. Like, there's a lot of states that you won't see a person of color within at least a 10-mile radius. Like, I don't like you can brand it and like and advertise it as that, but this is just like you're just giving voice to what is already has been happening for forever. Like there are states where it's all white people. Like they're the whole states. I mean, Baltimore alone, like Bolton Street, that's all white people. And then you move 2 blocks over and you don't see a white person in sight. Like that's already happening. People are already they move away from what they don't want to see. Like especially if you're wealthy and you're white and you can move to wherever you want.
I'm not denying that, and I think it's absolutely happening. I guess my argument is that like now that it's branded, right, and now that it's to totally just unabashedly like saying it outright rather than like dog whistling it, right?
It already is unabashedly though. Like it's very apparent.
Yeah, isn't that what redlining was? They would have communities like they would divide communities into like by race, like with housing and stuff like that.
No, totally. I think right now it's like more of an argument of semantics rather than whether or not it's happening. Because I'm in agreement with both of you guys.
Let's hear from Laurel.
Back to the question, would his presidency prove to be a step in the right direction? I think there's 2 ways to look at it. I think it would be a step in the wrong direction if he continued to be the president. But who's to say that it would be a step in the right direction if Biden becomes president? Because I know a lot of people are afraid a civil war will break out, like no matter who wins. And it kind of seems like violence is inevitable. So it's kind of, I'm wondering like, is that progress?
Good point. Sarah.
It's irrelevant at this point.
You sure?
Yeah, don't worry about it.
I doubt it.
No, say it.
I mean, fine. But like just thinking about like talking back to people kind of like locating themselves around like those who are like-minded with them. It's just, I think it's inherent to like human behavior is to surround yourself by people who like are similar to you. And so I think that brings about like, I think that just proves that the attention should be more towards like the like clearly like systematic issues that are on a larger scale, because like people are gonna live around people who are similar to themselves. And like clearly there's like specific like communities that are, I think, more aggressive on like their kind of agenda or whatever. But I think that it's important to note that like the larger scale, like institutional racism mainly in like inherent to like the country's constitution is important. If that makes sense.
Gotcha. Thank you. Gabriel.
Yeah, I think like going back to like another thing we discussed a bunch in our group, and like I guess it's sort of like the inherent problem with having Biden as a president is that like Democrats forever have been chasing the imaginary independent voter, this theoretical group of people that exists in the middle and could be swayed either way, right? Like saying that they are like the 2% that we need, right? And so it justifies them continually like moving more right on certain policies. And I think Biden essentially just confirms that strategy, which is completely broken, like quote unquote works. It's like, oh, like Biden recaptured the imaginary independent voter in the middle. rather than the Democratic Party doing what it really should be, which is broadening the left, like not moving with the enemy, but moving to to the left, because there are far more people than this imaginary middle on the other side who aren't voting because they don't see that, it doesn't matter who it is for them. I think in a way, like it's unfortunate that that like it's only because Trump is such a bad candidate that this strategy that the Democrats have been trying forever, like failed with Hillary. It failed like when the Tea Party, tried like in 2010. Like, wow, they're gonna finally get it to work, and all the think tanks will be like happy about it. But it's so dumb. Like,
I think you're gonna like what Rebecca Solnit has to say. She speaks exactly to that problem in a very, I think, very convincing way. Thinking of an essay of hers called "Preaching to the Choir," where she assails this idea that you have to, in Clinton language, you have to triangulate. That's what Clinton said. Clinton was essentially effective at heading off the Republicans because he adopted their policies in many cases. And so that shaped the thinking of Democrats for a generation that if they were centrist, they would be rewarded. And that's been a hot topic of debate. Let me speak to some of the racial issues you guys are talking about. What Gabriel says about this idea that when we migrate to our own camps, this is going to make our democracy less manageable. I mean, listen, that is exactly what critics are saying is the problem with our digital universe. I've been writing about this I have a chapter about this in my book, so I've been thinking about this a lot. One of the early theorists of the internet, I forget his name, and back in the early 70s, late 70s, early 80s, he called the internet the daily me. And what he meant by that is, when the internet was rolled out, everybody was saying things like, oh my God, this is gonna be great for democracy. People from all over the world will be able to hook up with one another, with people they never see. Well, guess what? That didn't fucking happen. And this guy, whose name escapes me, says by contrast, people are going to go to the internet and they're going to curate their own digital experiences in this thing called the digital me. They will not be visiting Fox News or anything upsetting. They will be visiting their own sites, their own places. And he predicted essentially what we now call echo chambers, right? One of the reasons that the digital universe, that digital media has been so has accelerated or exacerbated partisanship in this country, and it's made it's radicalized people, is that people they migrate into these echo chambers, and in these echo chambers they get hardened in their views and they don't see across the digital divide. So I mean, I think the sense that Gabriel is raising is very salient. How are we going to manage to see one another and cohabit in this country? And I have often thought that the solution was living with one another. I really did, but I'm naive and I'm dumb. I live in a white suburb. What do I know? I'll tell you, when I had these doubts, I had to go. My son had a robotics competition in Southern Maryland, over in the Eastern Shore, and it was at a place called University of Maryland Eastern Shore, and it's one of what they call the HBCUs. It's one of the historically Black colleges in the country, and I really wasn't very familiar with it. And when I get out there, I believe it's in Dorchester County, which is Purdue country, where they're raising chickens. I saw nothing but Trump signs as far as the eye could see. And I went to the various stores, 7-Eleven, Wawa. I saw the races mixing. I saw a lot of African Americans there. This is a county in Maryland that has a very high proportion of African Americans. And the white people they live with are obviously plenty racist. So I have doubts that simply living next to each other or with one another is going to be the solution to our problems. I'm sorry to say. I don't know if anybody wants to.
I mean, I think, yeah, I see that. I guess I think about sort of at least children who have a fresh start, right? Reading in that reading in that story where, you know, that child, his father, you know, called the author out and then, you know, ripped his child away, right? At least that child, you know, like there is someone like some interaction and being able to characterize that as bad, right? And knowing, you know, being able to go to a school at least where there is some chance of that being able to change. It may not be for people who are already hardened in their beliefs, sure, but otherwise, I mean, and like in terms of digital space, it's so easy to manipulate. Like I've known that like this has been going on for a while. Like this like Stormfront psyop. Like you know who Stormfront is? They're like a white supremacist like internet organization. Like they've been doing this since before Trump was elected, where they've been making these like conservative Instagram pages. Mostly exist on Instagram. Like who just post like regular like conservative memes and conservative posts, like reposting a bunch of stuff. And then after they gather like 10,000 followers, they slowly start to like insert like really, really heavy racist, like white supremacist stuff, like every like 15th post, every 10th post, radicalize people. And like it's effectively worked. Like it's actually like the left is not doing anything near that. And this is not even like from party organizations. This is just like from white supremacist Stormfront, which is like, you know, been around since even before 4chan, you know.
Hey, yeah, Gabe. So I think it was Cameron who put in the chat. So you were saying like kids have like a fresh start, or they're like, you know, they have a chance to learn or whatever, but they don't necessarily, because if they grow up with parents who have those views and those wrong views, like wrong and right is like relative to their human being, right? So people cannot think racism is, that's why people are racist, because they don't think it's wrong, right? So the kid will have those impressions and they will grow up with those mindsets and that ideology because they were raised around it, and they don't have a choice whether or not they don't know anything else, because they're kids. Kids are also highly impressionable. You know what I'm saying? So you can't say that they have a fresh start.
Well, okay, but I don't agree with you though. Like for example, Kellyanne Conway's daughter, Kellyanne and George Conway, but Kellyanne, who was already huge in the Republican Party, George Conway, he's been a Republican strategist for years, right? Their daughter, like I know this is one person, like has it like on a TikTok is like one of the most stagnant, you know, calls their parents out for their lies, is incredibly against, you know, what they have to say. There's tons of kids that are liberal in opposition to their conservative parents. Perhaps it's not all the time, it's not like some guarantee, but there's at least a chance.
I didn't say that, but what I'm saying is that it makes it harder because if you're a kid, you have no control over what your parents decide everything for you. So it's not a fresh start. They have their gear towards whatever their parents want them to be geared towards. That's what I'm saying. So it'll be harder as they get older to challenge those views, to challenge that conditioning, basically.
For sure, but yeah.
Mason
ahead.
has her hand up. Let me see what Mason has to say.
Yeah, I think I would definitely more agree with Rashad on this one. I understand what you're saying, Gabriel, but from what I've seen and also like what I've read about, I think there's this trend whereas like politics has been more of a hobby for the elite up until now, where I think the younger generation of these people are becoming radicalized for the worse, to protect their standing, not to like try to do anything good society. I don't think the majority of kids raised by like racist families like are gonna, when they're surrounded by that, the odds are against them, I guess is what I'm saying. The odds are against them to be able to learn how to think critically and like unlearn what they've been taught.
I definitely see what you and Rashad are saying. I guess any odds that are positive though are better than none.
This is a great exchange. I appreciate you all for raising this and engaging in it. I want to tack on to what Ian is saying here in the chat about the education system. I'm gonna launch a little bit ahead towards the end of the last chapter. What I think is, you know, really, I think very persuasive in Eddie Glaude is his point that, you know, if we're going to pull out this revolution of values, which racism requires, we need to change the outcomes, the values, the racist habits. They're linked to the outcomes, which, you know, they can be reversed. and they can be reversed through certain government actions. And this is the reason I really liked, and he gives a couple policy recommendations towards the end of the book. They were a little bit thin on detail, which is why I added that article from The Economist, and I would urge you to look at it. The reason, again, I like the article in The Economist is The Economist is rather no frills. It's, really bare bones magazine, and it is also rather centrist politically. So I appreciate what they like to have to say, and they generally have pretty good, well-founded scientific basis for their claims. And one of the things that they propose, basically, the Economist article, they write that one of the policy changes that can have and has had the most impact in combating in changing racial outcomes is integration, specifically housing integration. So this is bringing us back to where we were starting about half an hour ago, right? Baltimore City is, of course, one of the most famously segregated cities in the country for that practice that Rashad notes called redlining. For those of you who don't know, redlining, essentially the banks who gave out loans to home buyers, they would draw red lines around the neighborhoods that they did not want to give loans to. And these were neighbors that African Americans lived in. So the African Americans, and by the way, if you guys know Ta-Nehisi Coates, he wrote a wonderful article about this in the Atlantic a few years ago. I really wished he had expanded it into a book talking about basically the economic setbacks that African Americans had, or I should put it this way, after World War II, things like the GI Bill and various expansions of mortgage policy, these benefits were extended to white people, but they were not extended to Black people. And so Ta-Nehisi Coates argues that that's why cumulatively Black wealth is so much smaller than white wealth, because you only have to go back to the 1960s. Black people were not being given mortgages. And that was devastating, right? So that's where the idea of redlining comes. And Baltimore City, the neighborhoods have always been so integrated. The only victory for integration in Baltimore happened outside Baltimore. And I wonder if anybody here has ever heard of a little place called, that's not a little place anymore, called Columbia. Anybody heard of Columbia? Rashad, you know it.
I was just down there. I was down there with my girlfriend at the lake. I was like, we should move out here. It's way better. It's
Really?
It's like the air smells so different.
I haven't been out there in a while. Columbia, Maryland, in Howard County, sits between Baltimore and Washington. It was a new city built in the 1960s by a guy by the name of James Rouse, one of the most important developers in America. James Rouse developed Harbor Place in Baltimore, which in the 1980s, when that was built, nowadays, I don't even know when he goes there anymore, but Harbor Place at the time was like, that was revolutionary. He also built the Seaport in New York, which is, relatively speaking, it's a smaller development of Manhattan. And then he built Quincy Market in Boston, among other things. And then he took that capital and he decided that he was going to build an integrated city between Baltimore and Washington. Now, I'm glad Rashad enjoys the air out there. I'm not a fan of Columbia. I always get lost. The street, however he designed those streets, it's like they're looping, and oh man, I have a hard time. But it is, and it was a place, an integrated community from the beginning. And growing up, I grew up in Baltimore. I grew up in Towson. I've always noticed, neighborhoods in and around this city, totally segregated. But Columbia was the one place where that's not the case. And one of my close friends growing up, his mother is from Trinidad, his father is from Belgium, and the only place he felt comfortable living was in Columbia, and he settled there. But what I wanted to say about integration is, if you look at the Economist article, and I urge you to look at afterwards, the integration article points out that when, the Economist article points out that, ghettoization is a big problem, the concentration of various races in specific communities. And when you get, like in Baltimore, poor African Americans concentrated in certain areas, you know, there's a lot of different factors that go along with that. The services are poorer. The services are worse. The police service is worse. Crucially, the education is worse. One of the calling, you know, one of the best features of Columbia, and Rashad, I urge you to move there if you ever, you know, decide to settle down with your girlfriend. It's the best. It's one of the best schooling systems in the entire country, actually. And I should tell you, housing prices are kind of expensive because everybody wants to get in there because these schools are so good. What I want to say is that the Economist article points out, and this is actually an argument that Milton Friedman discovered in the end of the 1960s, and he's the enemy of the left. He is the arch-right conservative economist. But when it came to racial issues, he was actually kind of enlightened in certain ways. And I think one of his interesting ideas was that we need to integrate neighborhoods. If you really want to solve the problem of racism, and if you really want to improve schools, you really want to improve education, you've got to integrate. So what was his great idea? Housing vouchers. Does anybody know what housing vouchers are? What are housing vouchers?
Are housing vouchers the like things that you would get from the bank for loans and things like that?
Yeah.
You want to elaborate? Me to elaborate?
Sure.
Well, I know like that's really the start of more organized redlining with like vouchers really only being given to people who were white people who they were assuming, you know, like these people could pay off their loans faster and more easily because of their standing, but it's like, no, they were just racist and created a deeper poverty cycle and made all the funding go towards white communities.
Well, actually, I think you're talking about something slightly different than what I had in mind here. You started out on the right track, and then, but the housing vouchers, as I understand them, as they're currently discussed, this is basically rent money that the government gives you. So one of the things that Milton Friedman objected to was public housing. And why did he object to it? Because he felt that it was ghettoization. Okay. And this is like warehousing the poor. And then you have a concentration of poverty in areas, and then all the services and schools will stink in that area. He said a much better idea is let's give them cash. Let's give poor people cash, and they can go anywhere they want and rent any houses they want and infiltrate any neighborhood they want. Okay, that was the idea. By the way, following on this point that Rashad made earlier, you know, for some reason, America is really big on zoning laws. We are very, what's the word? I guess I keep thinking the word is anal retentive, but it's more like we're very particular. Like, this is where your shopping is. That's a mall. This is where your factories are. This is where your office park is, and these are your homes. A guy by the name of James Kunstler wrote a book a few years ago about our mania for zoning, and it's extreme separation of uses. And he noted that this zoning mania pertains to housing as well. This here is a housing development of homes that are $200,000. This is a neighborhood of homes that are $300,000. This is a neighborhood of homes that are $400,000, and those are $500,000. And God forbid you mix and match. Why? Because of the all sacred home value, right? Now, what a lot of people have noted is that zoning laws are very often a cover for infiltrating racism. So around Baltimore, when they talk about housing, public housing, they typically speak of something called Section 8. I wonder if you guys have heard about this, Section 8 housing. And there is currently in Baltimore County, outside Baltimore City, a very vicious fight going on about the zoning pertaining to Section 8. Where does that go? Because the voters in Baltimore County, especially the white voters, they want the Section 8 housing, which they equate with poor people coming from the city. Draw your own conclusions. They need to be in certain areas, and they should not be allowed to mix and match into other neighborhoods, right? And that is precisely going against the policy recommendation that the Economist article and Milton Friedman, frankly, recommend, right? So this fight for integration is extremely important, but it's extremely difficult. And by the way, I see Ruben's hand is up. Let me just make this one point. The Economist article points out that one of the reasons that integration seems to have such great effects for education is that the quote is that the resources tend to follow the white kids. And so if you have other people from other races in those seats, in those classes, they will be reaping the benefits of those resources just as much as others. All right, Ruben.
I just wanted to say that I would like to call it, instead of like zoning or this idea of America's zone, like to putting things in the zones, I would like to call it like compartmentalization, because it is common theory that narcissists use compartmentalization to have total control. And I think that is the same way that America uses the zoning or redlining or gerrymandering. It's a way to like backdoor control, basically, without saying that that's what they want to do.
Good. Good. Yeah, I heard a builder once use the words that like a townhome community, like a townhome neighborhood of townhouses. He called that an instant ghetto. And that those kinds of homes, his point was, they have to be away from single family 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom homes that are priced more, right? And there are always, as I said, there are covert racial implications of this, and there are definitely racial outcomes of this. And by the way, just to point out, the difference is something called mixed use development. And Rashad was in Columbia last week. Columbia actually, the downtown of Columbia is actually in the midst of a pretty big experiment in mixed use development. I've been out there in a while, but I know they're building apartments right next to the mall. Can you believe it? People will live next to the mall. In Towson, where I live, people are living on top of the mall. They just built apartments. That is un-American, y'all. What are they going to do next? You know, have a factory in the mall? And there are a couple of other neighborhoods that have been built around the country by progressive developers who see the significance of mixed use development and fighting that history of zoning, or as Ruben put it, compartmentalization, right? So there you go, Gabriel. In Miami-Dade, people built an apartment 5 feet away from a Metro Transit station with a strip mall. Those are the trends that are picking up. Will they have a racial impact? I don't know, but they definitely have a racial history. You know, I mean, I should say the strict zoning laws. So, right. Anybody else want to comment on the fight over integration, integrating neighborhoods, integrating schools? Anybody have any comments or questions?
I think it's crazy that it's even still called integration in the first place. I mean, it's 2020 and we still have to think about, or force ourselves to think about, the fact that some people don't want to be around other people because of their skin. It's literally insane. Like, we need to start calling a spade a spade. You know, racist people are not sick. They're not just stuck in their ways. They're literally handicapped and mentally not okay.
Sarah?
Just going off of that, something like upsetting to hear, but like I think important to like recognize, especially like just what Ruben said, like how prominent it is. It's like I remember in Mississippi in 2017, there was still like a segregated schools in like the small town and stuff like that. Like it's still like there's segregation like institutionally today, like throughout the country, in very like blatant places, like ways.
Of course. Of course. Yeah, absolutely. I remember I went to graduate school in the South. I went to graduate school at Emory in Atlanta. I'm not really sure if Atlanta counts as the South. It's, most people from New Jersey now. But I remember at the time reading in the newspaper that the state of Alabama, they had a poll. This was year 2000, and they found that more than half the people were against integrated marriage in 2000. So, listen,
I think it's technically still illegal in Alabama.
Is it? I'm not
Yeah.
surprised. That's why I've never been. I'm going to pick at this Trump scab just a little bit more. So, and I guess I'm kind of inspired by Ruben's exasperation. So at the risk of provoking Ruben more, I had to go up to Pennsylvania last week. My parents have a farm up there. And on the way up there, it's just Trump flags as far as I can see. And there's a couple in particular that caught my eye. There's these giant banners, and they say Trump 2020, and underneath they say no more bullshit. And I'm always amazed at that because I'm like, wait, this is the guy who wanted to inject us with bleach. What the fuck are you talking about? Right? No more bullshit. And I've started to wonder, what is it? Why? I mean, I guess I'm just super naive, but I would be ashamed to indicate my support, given his racist baggage. But what we're seeing is that there are people now who, I guess I'm giving a more of a negative answer to my initial question. Unfortunately, has he not emboldened people to stick to their guns?
I would say like he has, but it didn't go anywhere. Like people were, I think also because we have the internet now, we can see more of these things. But like there was a time where people would have public lynchings with like picnics and stuff like that. Like it didn't go anywhere, and also that wasn't that long ago. But like it didn't go anywhere. We just have the internet, and it just emboldens people. But I also think that it is a negative, but it can also have a positive outcome because you can see just how much it actually happens, and you can like when you see it overtly, you can point it out like, hey, that's happening, and you can't deny it because it's right there. So it kind of it's like a double-edged sword,
Yeah. Thank you, Rashad. That thought kind of crossed my mind. Like the racists, they're not hiding anymore. So there's that. Ruben?
Well, this is the thing. They never thought they were wrong. They just thought they lost the war. And that's where we're coming from. We're not coming from a place where these people understood that their traditions were literally evil, but the fact that if they would have won the war, none of it would have stopped. That's the tradition that these people talk about, when they say it's tradition, not hate. It's it's heritage, not hate. Like it's heritage. They believe that because they believe they're not wrong.
Well, yeah. I think.
Are you talking about that thing people say about the Confederate flag?
Yeah, I think that's what he's quoting. And it's funny when I go across the border.
It is. I mean, for example, that or like Trump.
And it's surprising. When I go across the border to Pennsylvania, this is just across the border here near Maryland, I see Confederate flags. And when I go to the beach in Jersey every summer to Cape May, I see Confederate flags. And both times I'm struck with like, what the fuck are you doing? You're not even in the South, What's up with the Confederate flag and you're in the North? That's kind of showing your cards. Yeah. Good point. There's something else I was going to say and I forgot it. Anybody else?
Isn't like this is I don't know if this is like a stretch, but like when you wave like people who are like neo-Nazis or like Confederate Confederate flags, those are the ideologies and those are identities of people that like our country fought against. So wouldn't that essentially be a traitor's flag?
Can you say that again, Rashad? I lost you towards the end.
like people who have the Confederate flag, like they seceded from the United States. You know what I'm saying? Like they left, and then people who are like neo Nazis and they have like the swastika flag. Why like wouldn't you're basically saying you're like a traitor, like you're not with this country. Like why aren't they like is you see what I'm saying?
I do.
Like
I mean, when I've often had this thought through the years. So the state of Texas has had a very lively secession movement for years. I don't know if anybody here is from Texas, but Texans often say, we're going to secede. And I'm always like, do it, fuckers. Go already. Do it. I dare you. Just, why are you talking? Just leave. You know, I mean, this secession, this modern secession movement, wherever it pops up, is just insane. It's just crazy. I guess the Confederate flag is not necessarily a sign that we're going to secede here in York County, PA. That doesn't make much sense. But I will say this, Rashad, this thought has occurred to me. That's the flag of a losing side. And they were the flag of a side that stood for something that was, you know, quite awful and heinous. And it is, you know, I have to say, like, I'm kind of shocked we accepted or tolerated these flags for so long. I'm kind of shocked, you know, we've tolerated these Confederate statues for so long. I don't know if any of you guys saw the Confederate statue outside Micah. Did you guys know that one, or were you already gone? Was it already gone by the time you got here?
it was gone by the time I like got here, but I heard about it. Like in my art matters class, we were talking about it.
It sat across the street from Micah on Bolton Hill because, everybody, because Bolton Hill was a den of Confederates. After the war, Civil War that is, when Richmond was destroyed, a lot of the moneyed people migrated to Baltimore and they built Bolton Hill. So Bolton Hill it's a Confederate neighborhood essentially, and that's why they built that statue there, which is now gone. I don't know where it is, but there are many of these statues around the country that suddenly vanished. You know, and I'm kind of surprised. You know, it's interesting. You know, the national psyche. Suddenly, we all recognize this was wrong. How did it take us so long? You know.
I guess it's like asking this question publicly is like, how many of these people, and like, or is it fair to say that they are beyond redemption? I say that like thinking of my grandfather on my dad's side, who like over the course of my lifetime I've watched become fervently conservative. But you know, he used to read a lot of different publications, and it's like, I know, like the past 10 decade he's like all entirely moved to Fox News, and to the point where it's just like there's no reaching him, and I don't think he's ever going to change his view. It's just he's over 80 years old now, and like that's sort of set in stone. And I guess wondering, like, do we even
hop in the little closet still?
Hey, Ruben, put on mute. Can't hear Gabriel.
Yeah, I mean, like, and so like, how do we just dismiss these people and being like, well, they're a dying majority, they're going to die? Is there a point in trying to bring people over? Because I tend to believe that like you just have to like let these people go. They're going to exist, and there's no way of changing them.
They are not a dying majority. There are plenty of people who are our age who believe the exact same thing they do. Because, like I said before, when you were born, you believe in and you listen to whatever your parents tell you. It doesn't go anywhere.
Well, the demographics do not look good, Rashad, right? I mean, we're told this repeatedly. The country will be majority minority by the year 2050. But then that's presuming that our recent immigrants are also not racist.
I mean, that doesn't even mean that racism will go away. It just means it'll shift.
That's right.
I mean, you're right. There are people our age that are racist, I think, but like just in general, like the Republican Party is older. It skews much older. So demographics wise.
I wasn't even talking about the parties. I was just talking about in general, just humans.
Let me double down on something that Rashad just said. You know, there has not been much talk about this. Before, you know, there have been plenty of columns written about how the demographic revolution is really going to benefit the Democrats. Right? There's just no way. There's a tidal wave coming, and the Republicans will not be able to hold it back. And when people make this argument, they point to the fact that the country is going to be majority minority in the year 2050, meaning that white people will be in the minority. But again, there's a fallacy here, and the fallacy is that immigrants of minority immigrants, that they will not be racist, and we should not forget that there were plenty of non-whites who voted for Trump. Okay, don't forget that, right? So I think Rashad's point is absolutely crucial, and this is something I don't see Eddie Glaude or others discuss enough. But racism under another name, racism harbored by other peoples, who right now we might think otherwise of or anticipate otherwise, right?
Yeah, I think it's because people think people think racism is yeah, they think it's only a power dynamic when it kind of is, but that's institutional racism. Like racism itself is just an ideology, it's an idea. You don't have to have power to believe in that you're superior to someone or inferior. Either way, you know what I'm saying? So I think people just have their own definition, but they don't understand what the actual definition is. Like how when people say black people can't be racist, of course we can. I've met black people who are racist, but like people just like need to have an understanding of what it is.
Good. Yeah, I mean, I'll make this added point. It's a little bit different, but it's also related. Republicans, for some reason, they have, well, I guess we can anticipate the reason, but in a way, they've kind of been doing themselves a huge disservice by defining themselves in terms of race. Because if they would only get over the race issue, there are a lot of demographics that are very conservative that would be very happy to vote Republican. I'm going to point out, I'm a naive white person. My first job was at Morgan State in East Baltimore, historically black college. And I was teaching class on ethics. This was 20 years ago. But I was struck by how many of my students, African-American students, they were quite conservative, So, you hear this often, certain politicians. Well, I don't know if you guys have heard about this lady, Kim Klacik, who's running in Baltimore. I'll talk about her in a minute if you want. She's a black woman who's running for Cummings' seat. And she makes the point that, black people, the Democratic Party takes black people for granted, and they don't, black people can easily fit in the Republican Party. And, African Americans do support, polls indicate that African Americans do support plenty of rather conservative policies that could make them a natural fit to the Republican Party. And for some reason, Republicans have just been, ignoring them all these years. Gabriel Ches mentions Hispanics. The Hispanics, it's very difficult because Hispanics, there are many different, varieties. You talk about the Cubans, they tend to be very conservative, Dominicans, Puerto Ricans. I would make a similar point. Hang on, Nicole, let me just finish my point and then you're up. What I would say is that there are a lot of Hispanics, the polls say the same thing, that a lot of Hispanic voters, if the Republicans would just get over their racism, they have plenty to offer Latinos, or rather Latinos endorse conservative policies that line up with the Republicans pretty well. All right, Nicole, go for it.
I was just going to say that at least from what I've experienced in Panama and like in the rest of what I know of Latin America, we are fairly like mostly conservative, but it's like for example, they support, it's exactly what you're saying, like because most Latin countries are fairly Catholic, they do align with a lot of conservative views. But then you hear Trump saying that all Mexicans are rapists, so they're like, yeah, we don't support him. But it's basically because of his racist comments, not because of his ideas.
So thank you, Nicole. My message to everybody is this. I know y'all are Micah liberals. Beware the day the Republicans finally get rid of their racism, because then there is a whole host of other demographics they're going to be able to lure in and attract. I think so. Right now, their racism is giving a lot of people that are rather conservative the opportunity not to vote for Republicans. But if they take that away, then that...
I have a kind of like a dumb question.
Yeah, go for
But like, what necessarily makes you a conservative? Like, I know what it means. I know what the word conservative means, but like politically, or like, what makes you a conservative?
Well, there's two, right today in America, there are two general policy areas that make you conservative, and they're often at odds with each other. The one is what we call family values, social conservatism, right? But the other then is economic policies, which have to do with free trade, lower taxes, and whatnot. And they don't always go together. Trump, as a lot of Republicans have pointed out, a lot of the never Trumpers, like if you've heard of so Gabriel was talking about George Conway earlier. He's a guy he was big in this thing called the Lincoln Project. If you should look up the Lincoln Project. They have a couple of very interesting videos online. And it's a group of what are called never Trump Republicans. And they're basically guys who are largely in the economic camp of conservatism. And they were disgusted with Trump because they argued that Trump is, he is bending or he is morphing the Republican Party away from what it should be. Nationalism, in their argument, has no place in republicanism. And Trump has essentially rebranded the Republican Party around nationalism. Orthodox conservatives say this has no place. Okay. Now, there are a lot of people in this country who would be sympathetic to the economic policy of the Republicans. There are a lot of people in this country that would be sympathetic to the social policy of Republicans, to the family, quote unquote, family values. So, I think if they can ever get past this racial baggage, if they would be enlightened enough to get rid of it, then boy, sky's the limit.
They were trying so hard to make Marco Rubio a thing. That was revealed like that was who the true choice was.
Well, it's very interesting, Gabriel. As a philosopher, I've often meditated on this. Why did their economic policy not really take off? I mean, why didn't it really? Look, they have family values, they have this economic liberalism, and they had nationalism. Guess which one captured the masses? Nationalism. Always. Nationalism always wins out, right? And Trump proved it. I personally don't believe that the economic platform can ever grip people. Family values, they can. I think they can, but I don't know.
I guess where's the breaking point, right? For people like clearly the evangelicals haven't been broken because they can still in the right mind be like, well, Roe v. Wade over, the Trump's infidelity and other various scandals. But, at what point does it break down?
Gabriel Ches points out strong family values used in marriage it's conservative, but not always Republican in nature. I think that is a wise policy of Democrats to point that out when they have the chance. I think that's definitely a good thing. But I'll give you an example of a kind of policy that that I think is surprisingly attractive to people. Maybe not so much in the news anymore, but the death penalty. Right, the death penalty is not something you hear about very much, but there are a lot of people in this country, and this kind of links us up with, and the death penalty is kind of an outgrowth of the tough on crime politics that we were talking about with Vital. That stuff has broad appeal. I think, there are a lot of people in the Democratic camp of various African Americans. The last time I looked at the polls, they tend to support death penalty. A lot of minority groups, they tend to support the death penalty. By the way, someone was talking about Catholics earlier. The Catholic Church is against the death penalty. So it's a little nuanced here. But a lot of people, they support that shit. A lot of people are open to tough on crime. So again, I make the point from a different angle. If the Republicans would could shed their racist baggage and focus on tough on crime, they could appeal to a lot of people. Maybe they can't, though. Maybe tough on crime necessarily has a racist tinge. Ruben.
I didn't mean to raise my hand. If I did, I'm sorry.
No worries. Anybody else? Any other questions or comments?
So do a lot of racist people happen to be Republican, or are Republicans racist? You know what I'm saying? Because like the more I always try to say like I'm not like really like political, which is apparently a political stance, but um like the more I hear about like East, like a lot of them don't have like that conflicting views. It's just like the label is different, so people assume a lot about what they think based on certain things. Like when I asked you like what makes a person like Republican, because like at least like from what I've seen, like within like the Black culture, if you're like a Black Republican, it's like laughable. It's like, why would you be a Republican? Like we're supposed to be Democrats, but I don't know either one of them like really. And then so like from what I've seen, like like historically, sometimes like they take advantage of the Black vote, like the Democrats. But I'm like really new to all this stuff. That's why I was asking.
Good. Are you? I just typed your name in the chat there, Kim Klasick. You guys haven't heard of her? She is a Trump favorite. You should look her up. My kids, they show me, my teenage kids show me her videos. Elijah Cummings. Elijah Cummings was a representative from Baltimore City. Okay, listen. Gerrymandering 101. The district. Did you know that Maryland is one of the most gerrymandered states in the country? It's absolutely outrageous. There are 9 districts, 8 of them are Democrat. The Democrats did this. They leaned it heavily in their favor. And these districts are outrageous looking. So the district that Elijah Cummings has, or had, he died last year. He was one of the more powerful congressmen in Congress. His district includes Micah. It stretches all the way around Baltimore City. It captures several counties. It captures part of Columbia, and it's just a disaster. It looks like a snake. It's crazy. He died. The Democratic challenger is a guy by the name of Kwesi Mfume, who I believe was head of the NAACP for a while. He's based in Baltimore, and he is going to win. But Kim Klasick is an African-American woman who's challenging him. She does not live in the city. And the call, and what's been remarkable about her ads is she's walking in Baltimore City in her heels, and she's pointing out like, thank you. I think, Gabriel, that's the district. Yeah, it's a mess. Take a look at it. And she's walking down the street and she's pointing out like Democrats have done nothing for Baltimore City. And she's like walking down North Avenue, right? And there's no reason for African Americans to vote Democrat, and blah, blah, blah. You can look at her videos and you'll get the picture. Trump loves her. He tweets about her once a week. He just adores her. I don't know. I was inspired to mention that point. Rashad, I don't have an answer for your question. I mean, what I would say is this, is that until the Trump phenomenon, Republicans, I guess, were doing a reasonably good job of separating racism from their policy. But in the end of the day, I mean, Trump figured out that nationalism was just really captivating, really, really mobilized voters, I mean, think about how many white uneducated voters, how many of them never had been bothered to vote, right? They never wanted to vote. They were never inspired. And suddenly Trump came along. I remember in 2015 reading this article about all these bikers, motorcyclists, these biking gangs in the American Midwest. They're like, oh, I like this guy. I'm going to register to vote for the first time ever. Really? This guy? What was it, And it was, you all know what it was. It was build the wall. For some reason, that policy made people want to vote for the first time ever. That's interesting, So...
I know the woman you're speaking of. I saw a video. Like one of my friends sent me. Isn't she walking through like a really like trashed area of like Baltimore, like the same like 2 blocks, and she's like, don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that.
She doesn't live in Baltimore City though. She's getting some flack for that. But I have to say, I'm starting to see her posters around in white neighborhoods, especially. They're liking her because Trump is liking her. Trump loves to trash Baltimore. He hated Elijah Cummings. And so he's often on about, Baltimore is a rat-infested city. Let me just say one last point before we break here. I didn't really want to walk us through the text so much because I wanted to do something different today. I presumed you had read the text. And so I wanted to have like a meta discussion of the issues that come out of this, which I thought was great. I'm very happy with what we talked about, the issues that were raised. I do want to call out one thing that he said in a good way, I should say. Like, one of the things that I really, really appreciate in this book is something he raises in chapter 2, when he talked about the American idea, and where he takes on this issue of, how is it that certain white people, a lot of white people, and he talks about Paul Ryan in particular, who was a very powerful congressman, Republican congressman in Wisconsin. He was Speaker of the House until about 4 years ago. How he, ignored, and other white people, their American idea, as Glaude puts it, their American idea has no space for racism. They cling to the ideal, right? Whenever racism comes up, they're saying, but that's not the ideal. That was not meant to be. And Glaude says a couple things. In particular, he says, well, if that's not part of the ideal, then how come it keeps fucking happening, right? And his argument is that this racism is actually baked in. It's actually built into the structure. And he gives a very powerful quote on page 37, where he quotes John Adams, one of the revolutionaries at the time, back in 1770s, who said to King George, he says, when he was objecting to the policies that they considered oppressive from the crown, he says, "We are not your Negroes." That's what John Adams said to the king. And and Glaude goes on to make the point that, listen, there is something about the American idea, I might even talk about the American dream, that necessarily presupposes racism. And I kept thinking about this story. One of my favorite authors is a woman by the name of Bell Hooks. I don't know if you guys ever heard of her. She's an African-American feminist, and she teaches in Kentucky. And she tells a story I was reading over the summer. Growing up, I think maybe it was even her mother growing up, because it was like the 1930s. And the family finally saved up enough money that they were able to get a horse. They lived on a farm. And some hardscrabble white farmers over the hill, suddenly one day, their horse died. And their horse was poisoned. And it was poisoned by the white farmers. And Bell Hooks says, why'd they do this? Basically because, how dare you get ahead of us? And so, what I take to be a very forceful argument for Glaude is, what is the American dream if some people are not left behind? What is, right, the American dream? What is the American dream? The American dream is that you can get ahead and you'll do better than your grandparents, your parents, blah, blah, you'll keep doing better. That's an unsustainable idea, right? But it presupposes that someone is going to be below you at the bottom, right? And so what I think is really difficult, very difficult thesis that he offers us to really think about is, maybe the American idea of equality, maybe the American idea of freedom is unthinkable without an underclass, in particular without an African-American underclass, right? White people cannot envision their equality. They cannot envision their freedom without that, And I think a powerful argument could be the MAGA movement, right? Make America great again. I remember when I heard that, I was like, what do you mean again? What do you have in mind? And clearly, they were thinking about the 1950s. These towns you see in, I don't know, the Andy Griffith Show. No black people, no minorities, white people everywhere, wholesome, skipping, blah, blah, It's a fiction. But Make America Great Again, they want to go back to the 50s because, well, you had, what they ignore is that, or maybe they don't, I don't know. Glaude makes the point that they ignore it. I'm not sure. Again, I go back to the point, like, is the American problem that we really cannot enjoy, or, for the white people in this country, they cannot enjoy their equality, they cannot enjoy their liberty without those who are subjugated, right? It's something that the philosopher Thomas Hobbes said back in the 1600s. Hobbes famously said, you know, you never enjoy what you have quite so much as when others around you don't have it, right? You don't enjoy what you have as much as when others don't have it, right? So what is this dream? What is this American dream without people not having?
Rashad, you're muted.
Hold up, can you hear me now?
Oh, I thought you were talking to like somebody else.
No. No, but yeah, it's interesting you say like the American dream is like it's unobtainable, or like it's like ingrained in like racism, because like whenever I see someone who has like American paraphernalia, like the flag like waving, I'm like, oh, that person's probably racist as hell, even though it's like, but it's just like, but it's like, why do I think that? Is just because of like my own experiences and like what I've seen. But yeah, I think that part of American like culture is like they're like, because everything comes in tiers, you know, because it's like there has to be like an underclass, or like there has to be like people have to be above other people, especially like with anything like wealth class or anything like that. Like we like even the stuff we consider luxuries here are made by other people in other like places where they get paid like pennies or scraps. You know what I'm saying? Like so, and we like either we don't know that or we accept that because it allows us to have these things everybody else does.
It's very simple, Rashad. Like, what is social mobility, right? Social mobility, climbing up the ladder. What is social mobility without people below you?
Yeah.
What is it? There's something fundamentally wrong with the American vision of equality. Ruben.
America is a MLM, basically. It's a multi-level marketing scheme, you know? It's a pyramid scheme. Like, the only way these people get up is by stepping on other people. I mean, it's kind of how capitalism itself works, but you know, it's like it's like the hidden rule of capitalism is that you got to step on somebody to get to the next level, you know? And we never want to talk about that. We only want to talk about the benefits that reap from capitalism.
Well, according to neoliberal theory, economic theory, and I'm thinking like Ayn Rand, if anybody has heard of Ayn Rand, the devil incarnate, she says, you necessarily have to have inequality, you necessarily have to have poverty, because some people unfortunately just have to be chewed up for others to rise, so again, I'm going to end here, but I'm just going to meditate on this last question for you all. I mean, there are other models, there are other experiments in democracy in this world, What is it about ours that suffers so strongly from enduring racism, right? Glaude wants to argue that, I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong, it's probably Glaude. Glaude wants to argue that racism is built into the pie, that the way we understand equality, the way we appreciate liberty, there is necessarily this underclass. I don't know that that's the case in France. The French experiment, they put a lot more emphasis on egalitarianism, but they are suffering plenty of racism right now as well. A different breed, a different kind. I'm happy to talk about that next week if you all want to talk about it. But I think that's something just worth thinking about. Like, there are these other democracies in the world, why might their experience be different? What is it about either their constitution or their racial makeup that makes us different,
I wish we had more time. I was, but I was gonna say like it depends on how many, like if it's homogenous, like if there are more of the same people, then it would be less of like actual racism. It would probably be like more like where you're from or classism or stuff like that. But it's still discrimination nonetheless. It's just in different forms.
Thank you, Rashad. On this note, I'm going to tell you a story about something that pissed me off immensely. So my family's from Belgium. For years, I had to listen to their bullshit. Why are you Americans so racist? Why are you so racist? The last fucking 20 years, they're the biggest racists on the planet. They have, I don't know, 15% of their population now Muslim. I'm like, there you go. Don't talk. I don't want to hear it anymore. Talk to the hand, right? This is bull. You know, we had an African American president before you will centuries from now. So, you know, yes, these countries that they began more homogenous, you know, that you might even say they are very ill prepared for the future, you know. For all our trials and tribulations, we might be cutting edge. It's hard to say. It's hard to imagine that right now. Let's revisit. I tell you what, let's make a day 10 years from now, we'll revisit and we'll talk about, we'll see, like, were we right about Trump? You know, all right, Ruben, you get the last word, but then I have to go coach soccer. Go for it, Ruben.
I just no, I felt like that was such a good thing to say because it answers your question for me, honestly, in the beginning. It's like I think we are somewhat cutting edge because there is honestly no other countries right now that are talking about this at face value the way we are. And that like either that can end up being a bad thing or a good thing. But like you said, these so-called safe countries or these so-called liberal countries will literally never have a forefront black politician or a forefront person of color woman politician. So like, yeah, I mean, is Trump exciting things in a bad way? Yes, but also it is making people wake up and start talking.
I'm going to tell you one last story, and then I am going to let you go because I do have to coach soccer. But my wife is half Syrian. Her father's from Syria, and I will say this: it is much harder for people of color to integrate into Europe still today. The racism, I would argue, is more intractable. We can talk about that next week. But I'll tell you, my father-in-law's story. He left Syria to go to medical school in England. And he thought about getting a job there. And then he said, well, I don't know that I will ever be English. And he came here and he feels American. And, you know, he has friends who stayed in England or in Germany, Syrian friends, and they will tell you, they say things like, I'm not English. They will not have me. I'm not German. If you're a Syrian immigrant to Germany, you do not get citizenship for 2 generations. There are Turkish people of Turkish descent in Germany. They've been there for 2 generations. They're not German. There is something about this country, for love it or hate it, it is easier to become American, you know? So I know I probably, you know, got you all thinking, but you're gonna have to think on your own because I got to get my whistle, everybody. My whistle. Boop. Got to go coach. I'm going to go kill it. All right. Have a great week, everybody. I'll see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.